Pastor Mark, Marketplace Church. Thanks for being with us tonight. I wanted to show you I've got my Here to Pray t-shirt on and my Here to Pray hat on, and just want to put a plug in for my buddy Dale Duckworth and Here to Pray Street Ministries. If you want to be prayed for, man, go to their Facebook page, send them a prayer request. They will come anywhere and pray for anyone at any time. And if you've got a need in your body, you got a loved one that needs salvation, you got somebody that might need deliverance, God, these people will show up and they will pray and they will support you and they will walk with you, and it will be one of the best things you ever did in your life. So tonight is from coming from Here to Pray. I told my buddy I was going to do this, so I don't know if he was watching or not, but anyway, just a little plug for Here to Pray Street Ministries. So there you go. And we're going to take the next couple of weeks and we're going to look at how to respond to chaos. And the prophet Habakkuk or Habakkuk, depending on how you learned it. I learned it Habakkuk. Some people call it Habakkuk. But anyway, he was having a bad time trying to understand why bad things were going on in Israel, and he finally got to such a place in his life that he's calling out to God and basically saying, God, don't you see what we're going through? God, don't you understand that we're being killed and destroyed? Don't you care, God? Don't you know what's going on? And he was looking at the reality of things that are going on, and it didn't make sense to him. And so he has this conversation with God, and God begins to speak to him about what to do when you find yourself in a place of chaos and you don't really know how to handle it or whatever. But the first thing that we need to come to an understanding, and this is what God told the prophet, is that he's in control. He's always in control. There's never a time that God is not ruling and reigning. There's never a time that God is out of control. God is never asleep at the wheel. God never just checks out and forgets about us. He's always on watch, and he cares about what's going on. And so in the first part of Habakkuk chapter 1, he opens up and he says, how long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you don't listen, or cry out to you violence, but you don't save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. And what's happening at this time is that God had raised up the Babylonians to bring judgment on Israel. And so they were coming in and they were just destroying everything. And God had told through the prophet Jeremiah what was going to happen. These people are coming, and it was foretold, but if you don't obey me, I'm going to bring judgment. And God is bringing judgment on his house. And the prophet is calling out, how long is this going to go on? God, how long are you going to let these evil people do what they're doing? And so one of the first things that we need to understand, we find ourselves in a place that doesn't make any sense. Because it's not hard to find a place like that nowadays, because I don't hardly know of anybody that would look at me with a straight face and says, life makes perfect sense, everything is great, everything is awesome, and it's just wonderful. I don't know of anybody right now that would say that. I think that if you ask people, is your life, do you have a fair amount of chaos in your life? You probably raise your hand and go, yes, I got some things that don't make sense. I got some stuff going on right now that I can't explain, that I don't want to be happening. And to be honest, if I were just dead bang honest with you, I have questioned, where's God in this? Where's he at? What's God trying to accomplish with this chaos and the stuff that's going on in my life right now? What is all this about? And one of the things that we have to learn, and this was a lesson that, thank God, I learned very early on in my Christian walk, is that God thinks differently than we do. He thinks totally different than we do. If we thought like God, we would be in a different place, but we're not God. He's God, and his ways are higher than our ways, says the prophet Isaiah. Because he says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declare the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And last week, we talked a little bit about good, what our perception of good is. And I've had a couple of people that have come back and they've asked me some more questions about that because they're confused about evil and good, and why do we, why do we have both of those? Why don't we just have good, or why do we have so much evil and we don't have enough good? And if we go back to the original creation story, we will see what God is doing. And if you get to Genesis 10, you see that as God is beginning to create, it says God saw it was good. And then in verse 12, it says God saw it was good. And then in verse 18, it was God saw it was good. And then in verse 21, and he's making the land and the earth and the moon and the stars and the water and the fish and the birds, and he's hanging stars, and he's creating all the vegetation. He's doing, and every time that he's doing it, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, over and over and over. And then he finally gets to Genesis 1:31. And it says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And so in that moment in the garden, everything at that point is good. Everything is wonderful. And so God looks at all of that creation, and he says, you know what? I need to put somebody in this thing to take care of it. I want to share this goodness with somebody. And he creates Adam. And he reaches down out of the dirt, and he pulls up this lump of clay, and he breathes on it, and into it he breathes the breath of life, and Adam comes to life out of the dirt of the ground that God formed him with his own hands, and he blows into his nose, and he says, welcome to life, Adam. And Adam stands up, and God is very good. He says it's very good. Not just good, but it's very good. And so Adam is there, and the first time that we see not good is when he looked at Adam and seen that Adam was sad, that Adam was missing something. And he says, this is not good for man to be alone, so let's make him a helper. And so he makes another helper, and at that point, everything is still good. And so God is enjoying a relationship. And this is one of the times in the Bible I wish that we had a timeline that said, Adam and Eve were in the garden for 500 years and then this thing went down. I don't know if it was 100 years. I don't know if it was 20 years. I don't know if it was a week. We don't know what the time frame of when they are in the garden and God is enjoying their fellowship and they're enjoying God's fellowship, because Adam and Eve lived in the garden that God had created that was very good, and they enjoyed his presence. I mean, this is one of the things when I think about this is how they kind of mucked it up for the rest of us, to think about how it would have been to be in the garden and just be able to talk to God face to face and walk with him and just survey the landscape and have God just visiting with you. That had to have been one of the most glorious things ever, to be able to have that kind of relationship. And God gives them, and I was just talking a little bit about before service that, Jesus didn't really ask us to do a whole lot of things. And God didn't really ask Adam and Eve to do a lot of things. I mean, what was the thing? Don't go to this one tree. Don't go to this one tree. I mean, that's a pretty simple instruction. Don't go to this one tree. And he defined it because there were two trees. The tree of life and the tree of good and evil. And he didn't put any prohibition on the tree of life. But on the tree of good and evil, he said, don't go near it, don't even touch it. And so what happens? God has created a good environment. He's called it good. And one of the things I'm trying to help people understand is God sets the standard for what is good, not us. Our understanding of good and evil is tainted because there are people right now in the world that think it is a very good thing to kill Christians. There are people in the world right now that think it is a good thing to kill unborn babies. They celebrate it. They think that it is awesome. There are people that think that it's good to do all sorts of things that most normal people would call evil. But God has such a higher standard than all that. Even some of the things that we say are good, God would look at it and go, you didn't meet my standard. You didn't come up to where I wanted you to be. You didn't make it. You have such a misunderstanding about what good is that you don't really know what it is. But we define it all the time. We'll say, well, that's good, and that's bad, and this is good, and that's bad, and that's bad, and this is good. And depending on where you are, it may not be. Think about some of the folks that right now in the world that would have loved to have had the worst meal you've ever eaten. That when you pushed your plate away and said, this is terrible, they would have thought it was a 5-course, 5-star banquet. We're just tainted. We don't think like God does. So God alone is good, and God alone knows what is good. He's the only one that can set the standard for what is good. That we can't really define it. And it says, so he saw all that he made, and it was very good, and that was the evening, and then there was morning, and that was the 6th day. And then fast forward a few thousand years, and God sends his son to do something about the evil that happened in the garden, because we know the story. Adam and Eve disobeyed God. They went to the tree of good and evil. They partake of his fruit. They ate some of it, and then instantly sin was opened up into the world because we had an open rebellion against God. We no longer trusted God. We put our faith in the serpent's words rather than listening and obeying the Father's words. And we mistrusted God. We doubted that God was good. Because if God was good, why would he withhold it from us? If God was really good, why would he not want us to be taking part of it? And we see that one of the first sins that comes into the world that is one of the hardest sin to ever overcome. You want to take a guess which one it is? What's the hardest sin? What's the most pervasive sin in the Bible? It's taken down. Everybody that has fallen fell to that one thing. What? Pride, yes. Brother says pride. It is so subtle that it slips into your life and you don't even realize that you're doing it sometimes. And we let pride get a root in us, and the next thing you know, we've lost the battle. It's gone. We've totally destroyed ourselves. And so Jesus was a perfect example of what a human was supposed to be. And even Jesus deflected the accusation when somebody called him good. He says, remember, we see this story in Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, of this rich man. A lot of times the little caption in the Bible will call him the rich young ruler. But this rich kid approaches Jesus, and he says, good teacher, how might I inherit eternal life? And immediately Jesus says, why do you call me good? There's none good but one. Now, people will say, well, Jesus was God. Yeah, but Jesus was a human too. He had a dual nature. He was fully God and fully human. The Jesus of the human nature knew that he could not take any glory away from God. His job was to show God glory, just like our job is. Our job is to bring glory to God in everything that we do. And so he says, no, why do you call me good? There's no one good except God. And so he gives him a list of things to do. And his response was, I've already done it. I mean, there's pride all over this thing. It's like, I could just see the guy's face as he's telling Jesus, I've done all those since I was a little boy. I mean, just, really? You're that good? And then Jesus says, I love what the scriptures say. It says Jesus looked at him with compassion. And he said, okay, if you're really that good, go sell everything that you have and follow me. And the guy instantly realized he couldn't make the standard. He couldn't get there. And it said he went away sad because he knew that he was not going to be able to do it because his things had more of a hold on him. And there's nothing wrong with stuff as long as your stuff does not possess you. You can possess all the stuff in the world if it's at the disposal of the kingdom. I know some very wealthy people that are some of the most generous people you'll ever meet in your life. And by the same token, I know some that aren't. And I know some poor people that are the stingiest people you'll ever meet in your life. It's a matter of the heart. Where's your heart at in it? Because if you're full of God and you're full of Jesus, you have a generosity about you with whatever it is that you have. You want to let other people share in what you have. And I've got some friends of mine from time to time that will call me up and say, hey, Mark, why don't you take some time off and come spend some time with us? And they've got some of the nicest property on the lake down in Florida. It's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. Boat dock, the whole boats, everything. It's just gorgeous. And just come. And when I do go, they'll have like a suite set up. I mean, it's incredible. You go there and they just take such good care of you. And they love on you, and you go in there and you sleep and you get up and they have fixed your breakfast and lunch, and and it's just incredible. And they're just generous, and they just want to bless people. And it's just glorious when you get an opportunity to do that. And so it's always a good thing if we can give a little more away than maybe we think we should. Be a little generous. Don't try to keep it all for ourselves. And so, the third thing I was going to wanted to address was nothing is outside of his control. And he hears us and he sees us. And so, the prophet Habakkuk is just complaining to God. He's just going on and on and on about how bad everything is, and doesn't the Lord see and is, God, what are you actually going to do? I mean, don't you care? And God tells him, he says, the Lord is in his holy temple. I'm in my temple. I'm on my throne. I know exactly what's going on. None of this is catching me by surprise. I know exactly what's going to happen here. I can see the beginning from the end. And that's something that's hard as human beings for us to understand, that God is just as present in the first century as he is in the 31st century. I mean, he's just as present. He can see everything from the beginning to the end. And he's not wrapped up in time the way that we're wrapped up in time. We're all on a deadline because we know that our days are numbered because the Bible tells us that. But where God lives, there's not days numbered like that. And another consequence of the fall is we got much shorter lives now than we would have had if we had obeyed. Because God's got so upset with us, he said, I am sorry that I made man. And you parents understand sometimes when your kids give you such a fit, sometimes you go, I'm sorry I made you. I had a hand in this, and right now you're not being much fun to be around. And God looked at the condition of the earth. He said, man, I'm really grieved at what these people are doing to each other, because every time I read stories like that from where God is upset about humanity, I go back to the garden and I'm thinking, man, we had it made. We had it made. I mean, every day was perfect. It was paradise. I mean, all of our needs were right in front of us. All we had to do was go and just take care of what God had created, and we just couldn't be satisfied with that. And sometimes, I get a chance to work with a lot of people, and it's like they're almost sometimes disappointed in how we helped them because they didn't feel like we did enough. And you stand back and you go, what else do you want me to do? I mean, it was funny today. I had a couple that came in, and when Lon comes and gets me in my office, I never know what I'm going to walk into. Sometimes it turns out to be a really good thing, and other times it's not so good. But this couple came in, and she comes in and she says, can you get us a bus ticket? And I'm thinking, okay, maybe. Where do you want to go? And she said, we want to get over to the Social Security office. And I'm like, honey, you don't need a bus ticket to get to the Social Security office. I mean, she said, well, how are we going to get there? And his leg and hip was all messed up. And so I had seen him earlier, like walking up toward Hardee's about an hour before that, and I recognized him when they came back. And when I seen him, he was kind of like hobbling, because the one leg wasn't working like it was supposed to. And I looked at him and I said, I don't believe you could walk to the Social Security office from here, because it's only, it's like a couple of miles up the road. But I threw him in the van and I took him over there. And so I get him in the van, and it's just like, okay, let me ask you a question. Do you know Jesus? I mean, I need to know if you know Jesus. Do you know him? And, oh, yeah, no. I said, no. I didn't ask you if you know about him. I'm saying, do you know him? Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? I mean, is he your Savior? I mean, I know you've heard Bible stories, but do you know Jesus Christ? And so the more I begin to poke on it, the quieter they got. Because it's like, I don't want a religious answer just because you're riding in a church van. And I'm not going to throw you out if you tell me you don't. I mean, as a matter of fact, I might take another loop around the block. I mean, because I want to know if you know Jesus Christ or not. Because if you know Jesus, then I know that God's going to make a way for you where there is no way. If you don't know him, I'm going to let you out of this van, and you're not going to have any hope in about 5 minutes. And so right now, you need to make a decision. Do you know Jesus Christ? And she started crying. And I could see in the mirror, he was telling her, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. I said, no, she don't have to be quiet. It's all right. And she began to tell me about how, as a younger woman, that she had gone to church and her life was on a different track. And now she's homeless and been homeless and has an opportunity to get a place because she has a granddaughter that she wants to take care of. And this lady is like 65. This is not a young woman. And begins to express all the regrets and the bad decisions and things that she'd done in her life, and that she needed to come, she needed to get that straightened out. So it's easy. All you just repent. Ask him to forgive you. If you had a relationship with him and you've been away from him, just tell him you want to come home. That's all you got to do. And I promise you, he will answer your prayer. And I could tell the guy wasn't digging it too much, because following Jesus has a certain implication to it that might not be conducive to your life plan at the time. And I've seen this happen with couples, and one would get born again, and now they don't want to participate in the sin anymore, and they're not much fun. And so I had the chance to spend a little bit of time with those folks this morning, and it was great. And I love those impromptu moments to where I had no schedule for that today. As a matter of fact, I didn't really have time to do it, but I just felt like God was prompting me to take care of this situation, like right now. And so I did. And I always tell Lon where I'm going in case I don't come back. so he can, so they know where to go, like, drag for the body or whatever, because it makes my wife nervous when I do stuff like that. But I got them over there and got them squared away, and I hope maybe we'll see them come in the door one day. But I know she's getting her life back where it needs to be, and when you take 20 or 30 years to mess your life up, it takes a while to get straightened back out again. But it's a process, and we're all on a journey, and we're all at different places. And that's one of the things that I shared with her today. It's like, sweetheart, nobody gets the moral high ground. We've all made mistakes. Everybody, me, you, everybody we see, everybody you're going to talk to, we all have made mistakes. And the only thing that makes me different from you is maybe I have a relationship with Jesus and you don't. But that's the difference. To walk in the forgiveness of sin, that I don't have to carry that burden anymore. I was like, man, would that not be great to just get that off of you? Wouldn't you like to go the rest of the day and not have to carry that? And most every time you get somebody in that place, it's like, yes, I'm tired of living this way. I don't want to live this way anymore. And it's like, that's the easiest thing to fix in the world. All you got to do is say yes to Jesus, and I guarantee your whole life will change. And back in the story of Abraham, you remember that the angel came to Abraham and Sarah and said, I'm going to make you a great nation. You're going to have more. There's going to be more descendants than stars in the skies and sand on the seashore. You're going to be an incredible nation. And he has that encounter with God, and nothing happens. Years go by, and he's walking by faith, and he's left where he was, and he was moving toward the land of promise, and he was going in the direction he felt like God was leading him, and he gets antsy, he gets impatient, and so him and Sarah begin to have a conversation like, well, maybe we need to help God out. Maybe we need to do something to facilitate this a little bit. And so Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham to have a child with. And so she gets pregnant. And when she gets pregnant, the attitude changed. And they begin to have some conflict. And Sarah began to get upset with Hagar because she was pregnant and she wasn't. And I guess maybe there was some rivalry going on there, and there was maybe some friction between the two of them because Sarah was supposed to have the promised child, and she wasn't pregnant, but now Hagar's pregnant and is going to have a baby. And so Abraham does what all good men do. It's like, I don't want to hear it. Y'all work it out. And so Sarah runs Hagar off, and she goes off into the desert, and she's crying and doesn't know what to do, and an angel shows up and says, why are you here? It's like, my mistress is mean to me. He says, you got to go back. And in the midst of that exchange, she realizes that God is the God that sees me. God sees me. I thought I was totally alone and without any help or any hope, but God sees me. And so there are going to be times in our life when we're going to have the tendency to feel like we are so alone, that nobody hears us, that nobody understands what I'm suffering through, that nobody gets what's going on in my life, that we're going to feel like we're isolated. Because she runs off into the desert and basically gets lost and doesn't have any resources to do anything. And God reaches out to her and says, you know what, you're not by yourself. I'm going to tell you what, you're going to raise up a nation. Now, the next part of that promise wasn't all that great if I were hearing it, because the next thing that the angel tells her is that the son you're about to have is going to be a wild donkey of a man, and there's going to be violence around him all the time, and he's going to be against his brothers, and his brothers are going to be against him. And if you want to know what's going on in the Middle East, just think about Ishmael and look at the Middle East right now, because all those nations came from his lineage, and they've been fighting ever since, and they'll be fighting until Jesus comes back. And then the prophet Isaiah 65:24 is one that I've had underlined in my Bible for a long time. And it says, before they call, I will answer. And while they are still speaking, I will hear. And I've held on to that through a lot of seasons in my life when I thought my prayer life was dry. When I thought like God doesn't hear me and God's not listening and God doesn't see. And I'm like, no, God hears. God hears. And before I call, he's going to answer me. He's involved in my life. And I've learned to trust God in the seasons when I don't necessarily feel like I really hear him, or I feel like I'm in a desert somewhere. I feel like I might be isolated. I still go back to that, God sees me. I'm not lost to God. God knows exactly where I'm at. He knows where to put his hand on me at any time, any moment, because God knows where I'm at. And Jesus says in Matthew's gospel, he says, are not two sparrows sold for a penny, and yet not one of them falls to the ground apart from the will of the Father. And even the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid, you are worth more than a sparrow. And anytime I get to thinking I'm not worth much, I think I got to be worth at least as much as a sparrow. And if God can watch and understand when a sparrow hits the ground, then I ain't got nothing to worry about, because he knows where I'm at. He knows that I'm going to be taken care of, and that I'm in his plan, and that he hasn't forgot about me, and it's not a knee-jerk reaction, that God is going to reach into my life and do what needs to be done. And sometimes I'm in those places because God is teaching me something. Sometimes I'm there because I need to experience something that I haven't experienced yet. And so God is working in the midst of your chaos. And I know there's people that are sitting in this room that have gone through some unexplainable, unimaginable difficulty. And it's like, how can God do anything with this? And I've been in that place. I've been with a lot of people that have. And unexplained tragedy, it's just left to God, because I can't try to explain it. Because if I try to explain it, I'm just going to mess it up. Because I can't speak for God. I know that whatever has happened, I know that I have the promise of Romans 8:28, that God is going to take that and he's going to use it to do something good in somebody's life. But I can't explain why the bad thing happened. I just can't explain that. I don't know that. And anybody that tries to tell you that they do is foolish. Because we can't know that God's purpose in this stuff. And when I was doing this today, I was thinking about all of the things. And I was thinking about Cliff. No explainable reason that young guy passed away. There's no reason. There was never any definitive answer to why that baby died. And you just go, God, how can you use that. But if you look at the lives that were impacted and the things that are going on now, you know that God, even in the midst of that tragedy, God used it for something miraculous. And I see that in different areas of different people's lives, and you go back, man, what does this have to do with what's going on? And it's just like sometimes I'm like, I have no idea. But God uses it. He uses it to change your life, number one, and then he'll use it to change the life of somebody else. And I've seen that story play out over and over and over again. And God's never at a place to where we're just living in chaos and he doesn't care. I mean, it may feel like that sometimes because God knows I've been in some of those things and I'm being like, God, this makes no sense whatsoever. I don't get any of this of what's happening. I don't understand it. I can't see any purpose for it. But yet, the reality is here we are. And those are hard days to walk through. And the best advice that I can give people is just trust God through the process. And don't give up. And just stay in it because he has a plan that will be revealed at some point in some time in our life. And maybe when we get to heaven, the final pieces will be revealed to us. I don't even know if that's the case because it may be that we don't even care when we get there. You know, we may not even have those questions anymore. We may get on the other side of eternity and realize that all these things that were happening that felt so final and so permanent weren't. Because now I'm in eternity and I'm not bound by this thing anymore and I'm out of it. And so next couple of weeks I'm going to take and we're going to look at the prophet Habakkuk's response to the chaos and what God says to him on what to do and how to do it. And we're going to look at that over the next couple of weeks, and I'm hoping that maybe it'll help somebody. Because I hate to think I do this and it's like for nothing, but I want to help people because I deal with that all day long with people like upset and uncertainty, the uncertainty of life. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. Can't figure it out. Why is God doing all this stuff? And sometimes it's just not all that comforting when your pastor just goes, I don't know. I wish sometimes I could go back to when I was 18 and knew it all. Because the older I get, I find out I know less than I did when I started. Because some things I'm not as certain of now that I was so certain of a few years ago, because I've had some experiences that are contrary to that now. So anyway, that's what I got, and I'm sticking to it. And so, man, if you're hanging out with us, man, we've got Dawn Sunshine and a Make a Difference event here at Marketplace Church this Sunday. It's an event to help you share your faith. And let me just tell you, it's free to come to. We'll have a handout for you. Let me know if you're coming. We'll have lunch for you. And there's no role playing. I just want to let people know we're not going to put you up in front of the church. You're not going to have to do any of that kind of stuff. But it's going to be some really good, solid information for you. And I promise you, you will be engaged and you will enjoy sitting under Don's ministry because he's quite the guy. So come and see us Sunday morning, Marketplace.